Welcome to Voices Carry, a podcast series hosted by Jim Gibutowski, CEO of Marketing Messages, a global voiceover services firm, and his wife, Janet Krause, a Boston-based startup CEO and former professor of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. Jim and Janet interrupt their life of marital bliss to discuss how professional voiceover plays a critical role in creating a brand-affirming customer experience for businesses, from pizza shops and auto dealers to multinational corporations with global call center systems featuring languages spoken around the world.
Hi, Janet.
Hey there, Jim.
Hey, it's been a while since we've done one of these podcasts.
It has been. It's been quite a while. So remind me, tell me about what the last episode was about.
Yeah, the last one we did was on voice diversity. If you'll remember, it was Denise Nelson, who's one of our voice artists. And we talked about expanding our voice roster to include people who would be recognized as people of color. And she did a great job. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback on the work she's done so far.
I'm glad you're getting good feedback. I remember now, she was so cool to talk to. And it just makes me think of the way in which the world is changing. And it's fun to see you innovating at Marketing Messages, taking advantage of new opportunities as change in the world happens.
Yeah, it's been great. I know we've always been focused on providing great audio for phone applications and call center applications, but it's been really great exploring some of these exciting new spaces. And I think back to some of the work that we've done recently around providing narration for videos. And also, remember the job we did with voice prompts for hearing aids? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that one was so cool. I mean, who would have thought hearing aids needed voice prompts? But you're right. Most of the time when we're on this podcast, we're talking primarily about voices and how you use voice through the phone.
Right. But this time, we're going to throw the audience a curveball. We're going to talk about some of our new podcasting services.
So I'm super excited to talk about podcasting, but I'm hopeful this is not going to be littered with baseball analogies because, sorry, listeners, baseball's not my favorite sport.
Well, yes, Janet, but it's right in our strike zone.
Yep, knew it was coming there, honey. Good, glad it's in your strike zone. Let's talk about how it's in your strike zone and then maybe leave the baseball behind.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about the episode. As some of you might know, we've introduced a new set of services to help businesses create their own podcasts. And podcasting is really exploding. I think at the last count, there were about 100 million listeners of podcasts who listen to podcasts at least once a month, which is absolutely huge.
That's a lot of listeners.
And it is a lot of listeners. And we love talking about the relationship between voiceover and branding. And I think this is a new, exciting way to take it to the next level. So what we've done is we've introduced a brand new division called ModPod.
Well, I think ModPod is a super cool name. It's like, I think it's really current, but it's also kind of throwback to that mid-century modern vibe. And I think it speaks to young audiences and well, maybe slightly older audiences like us.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Janet. I really wanted to take something that's been viewed as traditional and foundational, like the human voice, and make it sound new again.
Yep. So I think you've hit something here because certainly podcasting is new. And as you said, it's exploding. But there's so many different kinds of podcasts. I've become an avid devotee of lots of them, but they can range from murder mysteries to comedy to sports to gaming to sort of special interest. What's going to be ModPod's lane?
Well, we're focused primarily on podcasts for businesses and specifically brands. A podcast for a business is really different than, a murder mystery, if you will, and some of the other genres you've talked about. We believe you really need to be intentful about what business result you're trying to achieve. So for this episode, I think what we'll do is we'll start with what ModPod is and what we can do for our customers. But I really want to focus on one key question, and that is, what's the business value of podcasting? In other words, why would a business want to create a podcast in the first place?
So this is exciting. I really can't wait to have this conversation with you because, as you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts these days. And as a business person, I'm really interested in how businesses can use podcasts to drive objectives and results in their business. So let's start. Why don't you tell me a little bit about ModPod?
As we mentioned before, so we're focused on business, and it's business, technology, and healthcare. Those are going to be our primary markets. So we're clearly not the murder mystery people.
Right.
I found in our research that there's very few people who are business people in this. They tend to be mostly audio people. Our history and our heritage as marketing messages is we work with serious companies who pay a lot of attention to their brand. We've developed this competence around messaging and marketing in addition to what we do with audio. Our idea here is to provide a full spectrum of services. So what we're doing is we're starting with the business strategy and the marketing strategy of the company. All right, we're moving from there through the development of a series, so all of the topics and the guest profiles, the people we want to have on each of these episodes. And then we do all the audio and all of the marketing assets that are associated with the audio. So it's a full spectrum approach. And the central idea here is this idea of showcasing your expertise. Right. So what you want to do is through podcasting and through compelling and memorable storytelling, get the word out on what you're good at. And we call this knowledge-based podcasting. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this later.
So Jim, if I was a head of marketing and I was thinking, wow, podcasting could really be interesting, but I'm kind of don't know where to start. If I called you, how would you start with me?
Okay. So what we have is this, what I think really cool 3-part concept called get clear, get ready, and get going. And so the get clear part of it's really important. So you think about when I talk to people for the first time about podcasting, they just want to get going, right? Or they want to say, hey, we need to get the studio ready, right? So they kind of jump into the middle of what we call the podcast journey. And in reality, what they need to do is back up and get clear about where they're going. And that starts with what's your business strategy and what's your marketing strategy, right? What are the key messages that you want to convey to your listener? What are the things that they're going to value? Then who are all the stakeholders involved in this? It may be more than just potential customers or existing customers. It may include regulators. It might include experts in the industry. So it's very important to kind of think through all of those things. But above all, what's the concept, right? The concept being what's the theme, what's the format, and also, again, what's the business result that you're looking for? So it's critical to get that going and getting clear on that right away.
So if I'm coming in and I have this idea that I've got a generalized theme, you're helping me to think through, is this an 8-episode program? Is this 12? Are there interviews? Is this, is that the kind of thing that happens in the get clear stage?
Yeah. And you think about it, a lot of people jump into this thinking that it's, fairly straightforward. I mean, if you make the analogy of this being somewhat like an advertising campaign, there's some similarities. How many people would, without knowing anything about advertising, jump into advertising and just start a campaign?
Yeah, no, you have to really what are my objectives of this, and what am I, otherwise, what's your guiding principle or what's your guiding process for it all? And I'm betting most of your customers haven't done podcasts before. I'm guessing, right? They're coming in cold to this, but they have an idea of what it might be like.
Yeah, they have the idea. And then once we get the concept down, then that's the point where we can kind of move into the stages that get you closer to the episode. So the next stage beyond that is something called get ready. And the first thing we do is we take the concept from the get clear work and blow out the concept into what we call series preparation. So that's things like defining what topics you want to go through, defining the profile of the guests that you want to have on. What are the characteristics? What are the demographics? What are what do you want the guests to be like and to portray for the episodes? Most people, when they do this, they go episode by episode, right? So if somebody says, well, we want to do a podcast, here's our concept, and here's 1 or 2 episodes, and they don't really kind of think through what the journey is for the customer and for the listener, and how the listener gets led from one episode to the other. So we really, really think through that quite thoroughly. And that's kind of the first piece of it.
Is that the place where you're making me want to listen to the next episode because you get to the end and you're letting me kind of have an insight into where we're going next? And so I'm kind of hooked, right? I want to come back.
Right.
If you know what the next episode is, you know what you're kind of leading me towards and how my...
That's right.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, there's this idea of a studio. Now, when people think of studios, they think of it as a place to go, right? You have to physically go someplace and you walk in and there's all this electronic equipment. These days, podcasts are done primarily remotely, right? And part of that's just the way things have kind of grown out of the pandemic. But there's a lot of subtleties to putting something together or an environment together where everything sounds great. So it's things like, what kind of microphone do you get? How do you place the microphone relative to your mouth? Your room, right? You don't have to put together fancy acoustic panels, but there's kind of tricks of the trade to make the room sound great that we can help you with. And then the software that we use, it's kind of like Zoom. We use Riverside. We're using Riverside right now. And there's settings and things that you need to kind of figure out. So we help with all of that. Once we have that, that's the end of get ready, if you will.
Yep, got it. So you bring strategic input, you bring marketing expertise, and you bring technical expertise into these first two stages. All right, so it sounds like after get ready, we're ready. And then what happens?
So this is where we get into the heart of the actual production of the episodes. And this is where there's really kind of two mega areas. One is the audio itself, so what you actually hear, the file. And the other piece is all the marketing assets or communication assets that surround it. So when somebody records a podcast, oftentimes what happens is you come up with, say 60 to 75 minutes of audio, and that's just way too long for an episode. So we've kind of perfected the art of figuring out what sections should be taken out and then how you can stitch them back together in a way that makes it sound like it flows and all the content is relevant. If you don't do it the right way, you might take out a section that provides context to future parts of the episode. So it's an art and a science in and of itself. It's not something that you can just kind of do and figure out on the fly. It takes some level of experience. So we help with that. From there, there's all the other artistic elements of it. So we help with the music. So selecting music that is what we call the intro and the outro. We do all of the artwork. So if you pick up your iPhone and you look at your iPhone, you see the little square associated with each of these podcasts. So we provide or build the artwork for it. We put together show notes. So the show notes are a recounting of what was spoken about on the episode. And it's generally a written document that can be put on your website to help with your SEO, but you can also use that as the basis for putting together blog posts and social media entries. We even put together what we call a little audiogram where we take the artwork square, we take a 60-second clip of the audio, we put subtitles over it, and you can repurpose that and use that in your marketing environment. And then from there, what we do is we work with all of the podcast distributors like Google and Apple and Stitcher and Spotify, and now we're getting more Alexa or Amazon, and YouTube has gotten big. So we get your podcast published to all those places, and that's essentially the essential part of it. On top of that, we can do things like provide a voice talent intro. So we have professional voice talents, 180 of them as part of our core business. We have a network of interviewers that you could choose from if you don't want to provide the interviewer. We can even be on the podcast itself. We can actually help guide the discussion and start and stop where it's appropriate. So we're really meant to be, again, a full spectrum provider of these services.
Okay, so Jim, I want to ask kind of an obvious question. You have a really successful voiceover business, and podcasting, although based in voice and all the audio pieces, it's different. So why'd you decide to go into it?
Well, I think the main reason is that we're really lovers of audio, and we're also lovers of podcasts. I mean, if you look at my team, there's folks there who listen to podcasts on a regular basis. They're energized by podcasts. We're all audio geeks, but kind of the content's compelling to us. So it's a natural extension of what we do well, but it's also a way to expand the business. When we researched this, we found that of all the different marketing vehicles that are out there, podcasting seems to be growing at a faster rate than anything, right? So it's growing at about a 28% growth rate clip. And if we go back to the 100 million users that I talked about, 7% of those users are referred to as heavy users. So folks that will actually listen to 6 episodes per week.
Wow.
So you think about how many people, how much listenership that is. And of that crew, 48% of them are in this coveted 18 to 34-year-old range. So just from a business perspective, it's a growth area, so we couldn't avoid it, and we love it. So we forge forward.
That's why you decided to go into podcasting. But of all the things companies could invest in to build their business, why should they go to the trouble of producing a podcast?
All right. Well, there's many business reasons to create a podcast, but I want to start at the biggest idea, which is expanding your audience. So you think about how many people are listening to podcasts. I looked at a statistic that as of about a year ago, there's 50% more time being spent listening to podcasts than actually scrolling through the internet.
Scrolling
the internet.
Wow. Yeah. So more time spent listening to podcasts than scrolling the internet. Yeah, that's huge.
People talk about eyeballs in marketing all the time, and one could make the argument that we really should be talking about earlobes, right? When you think about it.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. But if you think about the medium, it's really ideal for building customer intimacy. Traditional marketing vehicles like TV, print, radio, even digital marketing, they're designed to be short burst communication vehicles.
TikTok.
Right. So it's
talk about short burst.
Right. TikTok. Exactly. 60 seconds or less. And really with podcasting, you have that audience for 25 to 35 minutes on average, sometimes multiple times per week. So that opens up a lot of variables or a lot of opportunity to become more important or be really important to the listener's personal and professional development, which is absolutely key to creating that customer intimacy. And if you're trying to convey complex ideas, particularly if you're in a technology space or even a business space that has kind of content heft to it, you have the room and space to be able to really, again, showcase your expertise in a way that you can't in these short little bits.
Well, I can attest to that. I mean, that's the majority of podcasts I listen to have an educational bent, and some of them are actually produced by companies. And what I love about it is exactly what you're talking about. I mean, these podcasts, they play a huge role in my life. Like, I literally can't wait to listen to the next one, like, because it's adding to my both personal and professional development. And what I love about the medium, the 25 to 35 minutes, is I can layer them with other things I'm doing. I mean,
right.
I'm walking a lot. I started walking during the pandemic. And so listening to a podcast while walking is like one of the most recharging experiences. I can't walk and read a book.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a discussion I had with one of our customers. This particular customer is in the life science business. She has a lot of life science or biopharma customers, fairly high-level executives. So she has a podcast, and she was talking with one of her guests, and they told her that, I'm a busy executive. I just don't have time to absorb all the information in this space, but I have time to do my rowing. Right, he's a big rower. So he'll listen to podcasts while he's rowing.
While rowing, yeah.
And so that's kind of a whole segment of people who kind of operate in a way that, you can reach them where you might not be able to reach them through other mediums. And then just the power of the medium itself. I mean, you think about podcasts as a storytelling medium. It's more compelling and more memorable than reading something. You have the time and space to develop characters that would be interesting to the listener. If you're trying to communicate that complex idea, you do it in a way that's not dry. You do it in a way that people will remember it and they'll share that information with people. I think about...
It's like long form. It's like NPR. Like you sit and you're like, oh, wow. Like just really unpack an idea.
Right. So we went on a walk, I remember, both of us, and you showed me this podcast about green buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I remember this.
Yeah, this entrepreneur who had come up with this very cool service around heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, also known as HVAC. And I remember this owner had a really compelling personal story. He grew up poor in an old building, and he just got this passion for, how do I solve this problem? And so he ended up talking about a lot of the technical elements, and I learned a lot about it. But the thing that really stuck out was just the whole story. And I couldn't imagine getting that kind of story by reading about it or seeing it on TV or
Yeah, I don't know that I would have the patience,
work.
honestly, to just sit down and read that. But,
Right.
Being out and hearing his voice and, hearing the emotionality that voice can deliver, you're suddenly kind of drawn in, and all of a sudden HVAC is more exciting than you could ever have imagined.
That's right.
So that's some of the reasons why, someone might invest in producing a podcast. But I'm really curious, how does it actually, drive business? Why is the format of podcasting more able to drive, specific parts of your money-making chain than others? But what are you finding out there?
Well, you think about trends in marketing, there's kind of, inbound marketing and outbound marketing, right? So outbound marketing being email, but also just people picking up the phone and direct selling. More and more people are finding that people don't like to be sold to. The idea is if you can build a lot of great content, people will come to you because you're valuable to them, right? So content is king. Mm-hmm. And this is just a great medium to get that kind of content out, whereas other mechanisms are starting to be more crowded. We're working with a credit union. They're going from selling point products to being consultants around financial wellness. They've said, look, our customers don't want to be sold to. They need knowledge. We want to be the folks that solve problems. And solving problems lends itself to case studies. It lends itself to statistics. It lends itself to examples. Podcasting is a great way to get those thoughts across.
Yeah, no, I want to comment on that. Like, I would find it so much more interesting for a bank to tell me about how I can be financially healthy than to tell me about why I should buy an ETF. Like,
right.
ETF is the how. What I want to know is the bigger how. Like, how do I become smart? Not how do I buy a product?
Right.
But I'll buy a product
that's exactly
if that's going to answer the question. Yep.
That's right. The other thing that podcasting does, it's a great vehicle for lead generation. And I never really thought about it this way before getting into this. Oftentimes what companies will do is they'll put together a podcast. They'll ask themselves the question, what target customers do I want to go after? And what better way to go after a customer and build a relationship than asking them to be a guest on their show?
That's brilliant.
Their podcast.
Yeah, that's
right?
Smart.
Because once you start talking to people and you get comfortable with them, then expanding your business with them is just a natural outgrowth of the discussion. And so, the same company I was talking about in the life sciences space, what this woman will do, she's the CEO and the host. She just goes through her sales system and she picks out the targets and then she calls them and she's just generated a lot of business that way.
Well, it's a fun conversation, and for the client, they're getting exposure to new potential customers too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the other thing from a marketing standpoint is, oftentimes the director or VP of marketing is trying to increase their open rates and their click rates on email campaigns and social media campaigns. And there was this believe it or not, a dairy farmer collaborative that decided to put together a podcast, and they saw their open and click rates go from kind of high single digits to 20 to 25% increase in opens, and I think it was like 40% for click rates, which was just ridiculous. So, podcasting can enable that just because it's a lot more interesting than, oh yeah, I'm seeing another white paper, right? I mean, podcasting is just a lot more interesting.
Absolutely. And then, like I was saying before, for the podcast that I'm devoted to, when they send me an email, I absolutely open it. Like, ooh, what am I going to find out that I don't have to wait till my next episode? I might get something exciting now. All right, so here's a question, because if podcasting's so cool, maybe some people are thinking, well, the easy way might be just, why wouldn't I just advertise? I've heard advertisements on podcasts. Why wouldn't I just put myself out there and create an advertisement inside someone else's podcast?
Yep. No, it is a great idea. The only downside of just doing that is if you don't create your own podcast, you're not really creating that intimate relationship with your customer. You're not spending enough time in a 30-second stinger within somebody else's podcast to really get the relationship established. And also, you can't get all the knowledge that you're trying to establish credibility through knowledge transfer, right? You just don't have enough time to do it. People need to be coming back to you, not somebody else's podcast.
So yeah, and as I'm thinking about it, I've actually heard this done. Once you have your own podcast, you can advertise your podcast on someone else's podcast. And it's so,
Right.
the targeting is so great
Right.
because you know the audience you want, you know whose podcast is reaching that audience, and then you're sort of embedding something else that they could listen to. There's a credibility that comes from advertising your podcast inside somebody else's podcast.
Or better yet, have the host mention your podcast as well as placing the advertisement. I think that's
totally. In fact, that just literally happened. It was a podcast is my devoted podcast, and they mentioned that there's a new podcast out in the same space, and we should listen to that too. Now I'm already listening to that one.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm feeling it. I get why companies, it's a lot of good reasons why companies are beginning to podcast, to create their own podcasts. So can you tell me a little bit about, we both know there's like millions of podcasts out there. How is it that someone actually gets the breakout moment? What is it that has some podcasts rise above the others? And how can ModPod help a company to be one of those who rises above the clutter?
It goes back to being a full spectrum provider. It's like, why would you want to, you can do this a couple ways. You can do it yourself. You can do it through, again, what we refer to as a chop shop, which is just, you record something, you send it to somebody, and they send it back. But the first thing a full service provider does, it goes back to that idea of get clear and having a strategy and having a strong plan and having a podcast where you go from episode to episode in a specific arc. Oftentimes, again, people will start and they'll say, I've got this podcast, I'm going to do 2 episodes, right? So they do 2 episodes. So what happens? From the client side, they do the 2 episodes and they run out of gas because they haven't kind of thought through and planned ahead for who they're supposed to invite. They get other priorities. The client just drops it. Mm-hmm. Our client would drop it. And then from a listener's standpoint, the listener hears 2 episodes, but they don't kind of see how they relate to each other. They're not sure where it's going. There isn't a hook in one episode that says, we should be talking about this next thing. And they don't create a framework that sets the expectation that there's more learning down the road. It's just kind of ends. So the listener is just kind of like, okay, well, that was interesting. And they go on to other things. And then
you're trying to help create the sense of, when Netflix gets to the end and it's like, you can binge watch. You're like, I'm sitting at the edge of my seat. I want to know the next one. Right. If you don't have the next one in mind when you finish the last one, I, the listener, don't know why I'm coming back. What am I coming back to?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And, the other reason is you think about all the totality of the service offering that I talked about earlier. Just think about all the nitty gritty details of the audio engineering, putting together the show notes, putting together the artwork, calling the guests, coordinating the guests. All those things require a lot of detail. It's like a lot of things in life. If you can outsource that to somebody who does it on a regular basis, and, oh, by the way, we keep you on track, right? That's kind of a big thing. If you don't have somebody keeping you on track and who's done that detail over and over again, you lose momentum. There's no accountability. The podcast dies, right? So
yep.
I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but there's something like 800,000 podcasts that have been started. Some huge number. Only about 100,000 are active, and only a small percentage of those are actually generating an audience. And so you can see why having somebody who's looking at this from a full spectrum perspective, really provides a lot of value.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. So when you started, you said, there's not that many companies that are really focused on business, but of those that are focused on business branded podcasts,
yep.
What is it that you at ModPod that are doing differently? You sort of mentioned something about a knowledge-based approach. You want to say more on that?
Right. So knowledge-based podcasting. So what that is, what we refer to as a discovery process, whereby through brainstorming and researching and doing some interviewing, you kind of tease out those things that your audience wants to hear about, what they want to learn about, right? So it's a structured process. It's being intentional about a knowledge framework, or I think earlier you referred to it as scaffolding, right? So,
right, yeah.
You create this, kind of uber set of ideas and how they relate to each other and what a user or a listener can expect, right? There's kind of a science to that and a process for that, and that's what we're hanging our hat on in terms of our methodology. And then we try to figure out from there, what's the best vehicle for conveying that knowledge? And so when we prepare a guest, we don't just prepare the questions. We kind of set expectations around, what stories do you have? What examples do you have that are really memorable Do you have any statistics that back up your point? So it's content rich. The trick is not to overwhelm the guests because, they're being generous with their time. You want to respect their time, but they want to be successful too. So it's in the tools that we provide to kind of tease out those, what we call key knowledge points that need to be conveyed to the audience. And I think that's the thing that kind of sets us apart.
Well, I know I've done podcasts, and I've done them where I've been prepped as an interviewee and I've been not prepped. And I know that when there's been prep about like, what am I going to showcase? What am I going to share? I know I'm providing a better outcome, both for myself in representing what I want to represent and for whomever I am creating the podcast. That ahead of time work and thought produces a better product, and a better product is something someone wants to come back to. And that takes some strategy and some conceptual work.
It's not, give me the file, right? I'll take out all the sounds and I'll give it back to you. That's,
or even, it's not even like, here's the interview guide, let's go. It's, let's talk about what we're going to cover, right?
That's right.
Okay, so cool. I get where your differentiation comes from. And so if I'm listening and I want to get started with you, Jim, how would ModPod go about helping me get started?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is just, first of all, you want to find somebody who's driving, who has the motivation to drive this, right? What's in it for me, right? It's that question. And then also, who would be the participants? Think about that. Once you get beyond that, I find the best way to get going, rather than just kind of have us present our capabilities or go through some kind of proposal process, is to actively engage in a creative brainstorming process, right? Because then you can answer the question, should I even do a podcast, right?
Yeah.
And if you get into it and you get into brainstorming, and then all of a sudden somebody comes up with a great idea that's fun and really reflects positively on the brand, then other people kind of get in and they get excited about it, and then it just kind of naturally moves forward. And not just moves forward, but moves forward in a way that's productive for the organization. So that's why we place so much emphasis on get clear, right? Just the upfront piece, because that's going to set the tone for everything. And I would start there.
So it sounds like the best thing to do is kind of dive right in and start the creative process. Other than that, is there anything else you want to cover? You want to share with our listeners for closing thoughts here?
When all is said and done in this, if you're asking yourself if you should do this or not, I just keep on coming back to, it's just a marketing vehicle it's exploding, right? It's just the way that people are going to consume information and are consuming information. If you can walk away with just that, I think that's important. And it's important to get the ball rolling. The other big thing is that within an industry, you want to be the first mover, right? So if you're in healthcare or in some sub-segment of healthcare, you are putting yourself in a good competitive position if you can get a podcast out there before anybody else. We're happy to help think through that. We even do, competitive research and think about competition as part of our offering. So that's another thing that I would do kind of moving forward.
That makes sense. Any real tactics about where to go or what to look at post?
Certainly go to our website, right? So if you go to our website, it's gomodpod.com, and go to the top right corner. There's a purple button that says schedule a consult. More than happy to spend an hour or even more at no charge, just talking through, maybe even doing a mini creative brainstorm. That's the thing that tactically we can do to get you moving.
Cool. Well, Jim, I have learned a lot. I feel like our collective interest in podcasts is something that businesses should really be focused on, because I think it really is a powerful, powerful way to engage with their audience.
Well, we think so. And as always, great to be back to doing these again, Jay. And by the way, I call Janet Jay. Thanks a lot for co-hosting once again. And bye, everyone. I look forward to hearing from you if you need our help.
Yep. Bye, all.